I'd like to first talk about a bit of the background. As we know, consumer food purchasing and consumption of sugar or sugar-sweetened food and beverage is influenced by a range of factors from individual characteristics to environmental circumstances, such as individual liking, all the way to cultural norms and social settings. Limited work suggests some associations between sugar intake, knowledge of health implications, and attitudes towards sugar. Now, attitudes to and associations with sugar consumption are also potentially confounded by attitudes to their alternatives, namely less sweet-tasting foods or other sweetening agents such as low-calorie sweeteners. Furthermore, these attitudes may depend on the policies implemented. This is a pertinent issue because strategies aimed to reduce free sugar intakes will have limited effect if positive attitudes towards sugar and negative attitudes towards the alternatives prevail. Hence, I've identified the following research gap. Firstly, the perception of sugar and its alternatives, such as sweetening agents and less sweet-tasting foods, group differences in perceptions, drivers of intake of sugar and its alternatives, and the relationship between attitudes and actual intakes in the United Kingdom. To determine my research approach to answer those questions, I first considered my philosophical worldview, which is a basic set of beliefs that guide my action. Was it post-positivism, which acknowledges that researchers are influenced by their context but still seeks uncontaminated knowledge about the true nature of the world? Or is it constructivism, which is concerned with the production of meaning by people and that meanings are varied and multiple? An advocacy or participatory worldview holds that research needs to be intertwined with politics and a political agenda. Finally, I decided on pragmatism as a worldview, which arises out of actions, situations, and consequences rather than pre-existing conditions. There is a concern with the application and solution to problems. Instead of focusing on methods, I aim to emphasize the research question and use all approaches available to understand the problem. Next, I had to decide whether to use quantitative, such as experimental or survey, or qualitative, such as case studies or narratives, or mixed methods. Since I undertook a pragmatic worldview, I decided to use as many methods as available to answer my question. This may involve beginning with a qualitative interview for exploratory purposes and following up with a quantitative survey method, so to generalize the results, or to begin first with a quantitative method to test a theory or concept, followed by a qualitative method to explore with a few cases or individuals. In this case, I decided to first do qualitative work to explore this area and then quantitative method to generalize. Therefore, my Sweet Talk qualitative study aimed to explore current attitudes towards sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods in the general public of the UK, including attitudes towards personal consumption and related policies. I decided to conduct interviews, dyadic interviews, and focus groups. I wanted to conduct this in a semi-structured manner and hence developed a list of questions to serve as a guide throughout the interviews or focus groups. This question guide included beliefs, preferences, rationales for consumption or avoidance, whether people preferred to reduce sugar intake or sweet-tasting food intakes, and current and potential strategies. This question guide was piloted prior to use in 6 different interviews and refined to ensure the clarity, relevance, and value of each question. I also decided to include visual materials at different time points to generate more discussions. The first was pictures of the sugar content of several commercial beverages in Sugar Cube in relation to the current Public Health England recommendations. So going back to the poll at the start. So many of you have answered 30 grams, which is correct. This is the Public Health England recommendation for free sugar intake per day to be less than 30 grams a day. I also showed examples of different categories of sweeteners, examples of packaging using graphic imaging similar to that has been used for cigarettes under the Standardized Packaging of Tobacco Products Regulation 2015. And lastly, a BBC News article on the sugar tax illustrated as a newspaper clipping. So one participant took part in a solo interview, 4 participants took part in dyadic interviews, and 29 participants took part in 7 focus groups, of which 3 were before the implementation of the sugar tax in UK, and all others were after its implementation. This study was ethically approved, and every session was audio recorded. I decided to use thematic analysis for this exploratory work so as not to be theoretically bounded. Themes were identified using an inductive approach based on the explicit semantic content of the data. Although I used the question guide as I mentioned earlier on, it did not serve as a coding scheme during the analysis, nor was a coding scheme established. Theme formation was purely data-driven, as I really wanted to explore in this study. Only discussions on sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods were analyzed. Discussions on attitudes and policies in countries other than the UK were excluded. For this study, I adopted a strategy that focused on meaning units rather than naturally given units such as a whole sentence or a whole paragraph. Initial codes were generated from each transcript by a secondary coder and I independently and agreed upon. I then grouped the codes together to form sub-themes and themes and discussed with my secondary researchers to agree upon again. All the transcripts were then reviewed again to ensure no codes were left out and to check the validity of all themes. In qualitative work, we also have to practice reflexivity, which is to acknowledge the role of researchers in the production of knowledge. I had to consider all researchers' positionings and the ways this might have shaped the collection analysis on the data. So in this study, all researchers involved were female with lean body weight, and the majority were involved in other projects on dietary sweetness at the time of this study. 3 researchers had background in eating behavior, nutrition, and the drivers of food choice and intake, and 1 researcher had a history of eating disorders, all of which may have had impact on the identification and definition of themes and sub-themes. So, 6 themes reflecting the attitudes towards sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods were identified, and these were composed of 24 sub-themes. This is a lot, but I will go through them one by one. So the themes are described neutrally because the same idea could be expressed as present or absent, positively and negatively by different participants. Themes are also presented in no particular order, and while presented separately, interactions between themes was also possible. All themes included attitudes towards sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods. The first theme is called value, and it is what sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods can provide. This included sub-themes taste, worth, special, emotions, and pleasure. So a participant said, let's say we're not going to have cake anymore because you can't make cake without either sugar or sweeteners. All right, so if you get rid of both those things, there's no more cake. To me, the life is too short to do away with good things in life. There's a recognition of multiple but potentially conflicting benefits of sugar, sweeteners, or sweet-tasting foods, and taste is something that cannot be compromised. There is also a distinction between special versus everyday kind of sweet-tasting food and beverages, such as cakes versus tea with biscuits. Another interesting quote is, I don't really mind. I would rather be a bit curvy and happy and enjoy what I eat rather than obsessively worrying all the time and restrict myself of things that I want. The next theme is called angle. This is defined as negativity surrounding sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods. There are three sub-themes: disinterest, disfavor, and relativity. This is a quote under disfavor. They are consuming things and probably getting hooked onto a taste without really realizing it. And then it's difficult for them to shake that off as they get older. This interest was clearly expressed in this quote. To me, eating sweet things is just quite normal. I don't necessarily look upon it as a treat. It's like I fancy something sweet, I'm gonna have that. Another participant said this: the reason I don't pick diet is because I heard about aspartame and I've heard people get tumors. It might be a myth thing, but both options are bad, and it's better to do better the devil I know than I don't. So in this theme, sugar and sweeteners were viewed not in isolation, but in relation to each other. Sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods were also viewed in relation to other food components or other vices. The next theme, called personal relevance, is to be concerned personally and to change one's own behavior. This included sub-themes health and body image, socio-economic status, stake, generation, and age. This quote here shows the absence of personal relevance. I will leave it up here for you to read. There is the acknowledgement that effectiveness of strategies would largely depend on the target audience, and strategies therefore should be personalized. Sugar reduction was less of a priority when one was faced with myriad of challenges. This is clearly expressed by this participant who said, although there are a notable amount of people now who are kind of, driving the healthy lifestyle, there is still a lot of people who are, probably more in line with where I am and slightly beyond, which is like, yeah, if you make it easy for me, maybe, but I've got other fish I need to fry right now and I'm not going to get there. The next theme, personal responsibility, is that one has an active relationship with sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods. This included sub-themes informed choice, self-regulation, internal conflict, and motivation. This quote here refers to the traffic light system. I'll leave it here for you to read. Another interesting quote here shows internal conflict with naughty sweet. So clearly, individuals valued the ability to understand and make their own decisions. There is also the all or nothing mentality. Importantly, taste preferences were believed to be modifiable. The next theme, called understanding, is defined as the acquiring, comprehending, and applying insights on sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods. So sweeteners generally referred to low or no caloric sweeteners and were treated separately from naturally sweetening agents such as honey. So one participant expressed her concern that if people misinterpreted the message that sweeteners are okay and sugars are less okay, people might think, well, I won't bother exercising now, and they think then if I just turn to sweeteners. There is also inadequate knowledge of sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods, sugar tax, and alternative food preparations, as shown in this quote. Another participant commented that, but brown rice is better for you, so surely brown sugar is. In this theme, moderate support for the use of low or no caloric sweeteners as a short-term strategy to reduce dietary sugar was seen. Finally, the last theme is not up to me, is that one takes a passive approach towards sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods because intake is subjected to other factors. This included sub-themes deception, beyond individual control, strategies, and regulation. The addiction to sugar might be difficult to overcome and would require professional help. This is shown by the participant's quote here. There is also distrust of current labels, information, government policies, and the food industry. A participant said, I think it's sneaky how much they put in stuff. It can be hard to stick to your plan or keep things in moderation when companies load things with sugar and fat. In this theme, healthy consumption was the responsibility of the government. Some individuals felt that people cannot be relied on to know what is best for them. This is expressed by the quote here. I'll leave it here for you to read. There is also expression that current dietary recommendations were seen as possibly unrealistic. Now, before I go on to explain more of the results, I would first like to share with you the other results from the poll. The first question was, do you like sweet-tasting foods? And the majority of the attendees here tonight like sweet-tasting foods. This poll was very clearly split into half. Is honey better for you than sugar? Now, I would like to clarify this question. It should be better phrased as, is honey better for your health than sugar? And this is split into 50-50. So as you can see, just from the simple poll, we can understand that there's wide-ranging perceptions of sugar itself and also other sweetening agents. And lastly, in relation to personal relevance, you care about your own sugar intake. Some people care about it very much, and majority care about it sometimes. And one participant here tonight says that he or she do not care about he or she's own sugar intake. From this study, we have seen that the inherently rewarding nature of sugar and sweet taste, benefits such as taste and pleasure, alongside reasons associated with emotions and memories, counter indifferences, negativity, and health concerns. There is the complexity of sweetness and sugar, and also the widely different perspectives on this subject matter. There is also beliefs of individual differences and individual motivations, therefore influencing individual dietary behaviors. And this supports the existence of differing concerns and barriers towards healthy food consumptions among different population groups. There is also the idea of personal choice and control, which is consistent with literature relating to food choice, including acceptance of dietary guidelines. Self-regulation was recognized as a result of inner conflict and required additional motivation, but the overriding idea of personal choice and responsibility remained paramount. Importantly, information may be available, but inaccessible by certain individuals or population groups, and misunderstanding and confusion often still remain. With the clear benefits and disadvantages of sugar, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods, plus the importance of personal relevance, there is clearly a need for individualized and personalized strategies. So currently, there is an absence of evidence for the prevalence of different attitudes in different consumer groups, which makes prioritization of certain approaches difficult. Therefore, future work should investigate the dominant attitudes in specific individuals or population groups and the relationships between specific attitudes and actual intake. Hence, going back to the research gap, we have now understood point 1. If you remember when we started, we were going to do qualitative first and then quantitative. Therefore, the next step will be to use quantitative for the remaining research gaps identified. I would like to know about the group differences in perceptions, such as between socioeconomic status, between gender, between different consumption frequencies, and between weight status. And so the quantitative work aims to explore the relationship between attitudes towards and actual intake of sweet foods, sugar, and sweeteners in the general public of the UK. This will be done by asking estimated intakes of sugar-sweetened foods or sweeteners-sweetened foods, attitudes which are developed from this qualitative work I have just explained. And then finally, demographic and lifestyle characteristics questions. This is just to show you that I've already started distributing the questionnaire in the general public of the UK, and it's an example of the poster. So it would be great if you can also participate in this questionnaire, and we will send a link to this questionnaire in the follow-up email. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Well done for a really interesting talk. It looks like you've got some very exciting times ahead of you when you start getting the results in from your questionnaire. So, as I said earlier, we're just going to take a short break. If we come back at 22, that'll just give everybody a short time. We're running 5 minutes early, so we'll come back at 22. And yeah, I'll start looking at the questions. So if you have got any questions, please add them to the chat. And we'll see you all in approximately 7 minutes time. Okay, thank you. Bye. Welcome back, everyone. So I'm just going to start off with some of the questions that have come up in the chat. I'm going to start off with one that came up, and that's, what's the difference between sugar and free sugar?
Okay, so sugar includes, so let's say we call sugar as total sugars. Then free sugar includes everything except for naturally occurring sugars in fruits, whole fruits, vegetables, and milk. But often people use sugar just to refer to the table sugar that you add into your tea. I hope that answers the question on what free sugars is.
Now, I'm going to sort of follow that up with the question that I think does follow on from that. Why do you use the example of honey? Because it's got a bit of chat going and a bit of debate to answer your question that you had in the poll.
So before I continue with any answering of questions, I would just like to clarify that I'm not a dietitian or a nutritionist. So I cannot provide any dietary guidelines or recommendations. I'm really focusing my research on how people think and feel about this topic. Okay, so to answer your question, I chose to ask everyone here tonight about honey because during the study, many participants voiced out honey as the superior to sugar when prompted with questions such as, "Oh, do you consume sugar in your diet?" and things like that. People just willingly give information that, "Oh, I do not eat sugar, I eat honey," which implies that they think that it's two separate things. And actually, honey is considered a type of sugar. And so I cannot tell people what to eat, but categorization-wise, honey is a type of sugar.
Thanks. That was just me throwing in a little question along those lines. I think because people were chatting about it. So is your research looking for a link between, so particularly the survey quantitative aspect, are you looking for a link between people's attitudes towards sugar and how much they consume?
Yes, exactly that. So I would like to split into different population groups as well, because different, let's say different age groups may have different attitudes and their relationship towards, and the relationship between their attitudes and intake may differ from another population group. So if we know exactly what are the attitudes towards sugar, sweetness, and sweet tasting foods in a particular population group, and if it leads to a higher intake or a lower intake, then we can use this information to create more personalized strategies.
Okay, so drawing on the results that you got from the qualitative aspect, which is the most concerning theme from your study?
Personally, I think that personal relevance is very concerning because people might think that it's not up to me, or they might think that, oh yes, I have the responsibility to look at my sugar intake. But even if they think that they are personally responsible, if they do not think that it is relevant to me now, as the quote mentioned earlier, I have other fish I need to fry, then they will not change their behavior because they do not think it's relevant to them at this point.
Okay, so following on from that, something else that's having a bit of a chat that might be outside your remit, but how can we know how bad sugars are for us on an individual level? So based on our physiology and our age and all that sort of thing.
That's a really good question. It's not really within the scope of my research, but there are certain research going on now about certain phenotypes towards liking sweet foods. So some people have the phenotype that they like to eat really sweet food, and some people really dislike sweet tasting foods. And there are other researchers who are trying to find out whether there's a relation between such phenotype towards liking a lot of sweet foods and whether it relates to higher BMI or fat mass.
So it's definitely, and obviously it's an area that is of interest to many people, and it's just slightly outside. There's only so much you can do in a PhD. Okay, so sort of related to that, so what sort of age range were your participants for the qualitative study? And did any of them mention non-inflammatory diets?
So the age range was from 18 years old to 65 years old. So there were 17 participants who were aged between 18 to 30, and 4 aged 31 to 40, another 4 aged 41 to 50, and 4 were aged 51 to 65. However, there are 5 participants aged that were not recorded. And with regards to their diets, none of them indicated that they had any special diets to follow.
So you had quite a good age range, is what you're saying. So, you know, so the attitude that you were observing, that you were getting from those interviews, were covering quite a good range of ages.
Yeah.
Um, this is a question about your research, but again, I think it might be something that you may or may not know about. But did any of your research cover how participants' attitudes towards sugar are actually formed?
Good question. I did not research on that explicitly, but through people's sharing, because this is a qualitative study. So there were people who expressed that when they were younger, their parents brought them to eat at certain dessert shops or take them to eat ice cream during summer. And so their liking or their emotions and happy memories are then linked to those family history. And also there are participants who expressed that their parents restricted their sugar intake or their sweet tasting food intake. And so such parental controls may have influenced their attitudes today as well.
So they were rebelling by stuffing their face with chocolate.
Yeah, not exactly.
Here's one of the more late, sort of later coming in ones. Do you think the sugar tax has had a positive impact on sugar consumption? I would change that to, do you think it's had an impact on sugar consumption?
Yes, actually, the sugar tax has had positive impact on sugar consumption because sugar tax necessitated some product reformulations by food companies. And so sugar contents in different food and beverages had to be lowered. And of course, consumers can always buy more of the same product. But from the Public Health England's report, we have seen that consumption has gone down with sugar tax. And some participants in this study have also expressed that they think twice about buying certain things because now they see the prices have gone up. But there are also participants who have no idea that sugar tax has already been implemented.
And you'd kind of expect that, wouldn't you? It depends on how much sugar you're eating as well, and how important it is in your life. There's been a couple of questions around attitudes towards sweeteners, and what are people's perceptions of sweeteners and their health effects?
So many people saw sweeteners just as equal to low or no caloric sweeteners. So, for example, they do not see honey or maple syrup as a sweetener. So if you're asking about attitudes towards low or no caloric sweeteners,
I think that's what it was, yeah.
Some participants think that it can cause cancer, and they have heard a lot of hearsay about the bad health implications of low or no caloric sweeteners. And because mine is a qualitative study, I cannot comment on how many people say each statement. But there are also expressions that low or no caloric sweeteners are good for you because they can provide the same pleasurable sweet taste without the health implications of sugar, such as calories. So that there are some support for low or no caloric sweeteners as well.
And sorry, I'm just frantically looking through my list here because I think that pretty much covers everything. Does anybody else have any? Does anybody want to ask any questions themselves? Sorry, I just need to see whether or not anybody's got their hands up. Jill Hale, you've got your hand up.
Yes, hello. I was the person that raised the question about the non-inflammatory diet, simply because I have a personal interest at the moment. I've been advised because of my arthritis to try and exclude sugar, among other things, from my diet, rather than have to rely on increasing pain medication, which is why I was wondering about the age range of the participants. But perhaps at 65, these people are yet to be challenged with the some of the blessings of more mature years.
I think there are also people who need to avoid sugar, for example, for diabetic purposes. So,
yeah.
I had to first find out the general public's attitude towards sweeteners and sugar. And so my target group did not include people who needed to eat, let's say, a sugar replacement. I wanted to cover all grounds first. But it is important to find out specific population groups and their needs. This is why there is a need for individualized strategies, because if there's no one size fit all for any health recommendations, including sugar. So there might be a certain group who cannot eat certain types of sweeteners, and there might be a group that cannot eat sugar. And so attitudes towards the alternatives are also important.
Thank you, Claudia.
And that would be sort of a much, I think, to be able to do a population study like that, we would take an awful lot of money and a lot longer than you've got to do a PhD as well. That it's a case of just scratching the surface to try and get to grips with one little aspect of this problem and starting where you are. So following on from this is a question from Adam. Could your research help with inform future health-related policies?
It's possible. That would be a goal, that when we identify dominant attitudes in different groups and how maybe certain groups have certain misconceptions, then we can target education to different groups and make sure that information is accessible to everyone. I mean, everyone really, from children all the way to adults, and in different income level or gender group. Which is why I think my next step, the quantitative work, is very important, because I would like to generalize what I have learned from this qualitative work to the whole population. And if I can get as many people in different age groups and in different income level or different health concerns, because I have a question that asks what health concerns they are facing right now. And then I can kind of to assess like differences in attitudes and the link towards their actual intake. And we could help you better further advance this part of research. And so it'd be nice if everyone shares the questionnaire link to everyone, so that more people can fill it in, and I can know more about people living in the UK and what they think of sugar and how it relates to their intake.
And if anybody has missed it, if you go to the chat, then Adam's actually put the link in the chat from tonight's talk. I think he's also said that the information will go in a post-talk email that will include the link as well. So yeah, please follow the link, do the questionnaire. Help Claudia find out about all these things, because obviously there's quite a lot of questions around how people's attitudes are and things like that, but obviously that's what you're looking to find out, is we're only at a certain beginning stage of your research, so to be able to sort of answer some of the bigger questions are going to take, you'll need to come back and tell us, really, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, lovely.
Once you've got all your results and you've had a chance to sort of bring everything together, I think it'd be really nice to get the whole picture of what you've done and how it all fits together.
Yeah, I personally think it will be really interesting to find out what attitudes link to higher intake or lower intake, just because we might think that, let's say if someone has maybe more correct perception of sugar, does it mean that they will eat healthier or not? We really don't know.
Or does it mean that they just don't care? Because if you've got a big enough sample, then you'd expect to get a range of people anyway. That hopefully, because that'll be a good thing, that you're actually getting a range of people rather than just a certain population group that will be responding. And that's what you need, is lots of people to respond to your questionnaire, isn't it? Give you lots and lots of data to play with. There's a question here, and again, it's something to think about, is the whole idea that fruits in supermarket are becoming increasingly selected for their sweetness. So do you think this might detract from some of the efforts to reduce sugar consumption?
This is a good question, because it kind of relates the difference between sweetness and sugar. So sweetness consumption and sugar consumption can be differentiated, as the taste of the diet, the sweet taste of the diet, has actually not been shown to have any negative health effects on people. So we might think that, oh, if you eat a lot of sweet things, you might have worse health outcomes, but this has not been shown. It has been shown for sugar intake, but not sweet foods intake. And following that, so if fruits in supermarkets are, let's say, maybe even genetically modified to be even more sweet, there's also this line of thought that our diet will just become increasingly sweeter, and we will like more sweet food, and then we will eat more and more sugar. However, it has not been shown that sweet taste preferences can be modified. So we do not know for sure whether if you eat a lot of sweet things in your diet, will you like more sweet foods.
So again, it'll come down to individual preferences, won't it? But I think, and something else that was mentioned is the whole idea of, just because something doesn't taste sweet doesn't mean to say it doesn't contain sugar, and lots of sugar as well, isn't it?
Yeah, yes.
So, and I think that's, so there's a question from David and Margaret saying, by sugars, do you really mean sucrose? And I think that's part of the point of your research, isn't it? Is to get people's attitudes rather than to the specifics.
Yeah, to everything that people might think about sugar, and including sugar from fruits, or sugar that you see as sugar cubes, or sugar in fruit juices. So and sugar in honey as well. So sucrose is just a form of sucrose is just a form of sugar, but there are other forms of sugar, and this umbrella term of sugar is, I guess, what complicates things and why there are so many opinions about this, because we use the same term to refer to many things. While there are actually more subcategorization of sugar, including free sugars, which is what the Public Health of England recommends us to 30 grams. So that is free sugar. And then there's also a subsection of added sugar. So it's quite complex.
And as you said earlier, you're not a nutritionist.
Sorry, David and Margaret. I hope I answered your question.
Down at the bottom. Look at that. Right.
Oh, you've just switched it off again.
Sorry about that. So really by sugar, you are going to what the recipient understands by sugar rather than the technical description. And some sugars are thought to be good for you and others are bad, but it's what the individual means by sugar.
Yes, exactly. I would like to sieve out all the things that people think about sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, understand. Thank you.
Okay, there's another one from Adam. Is were you surprised by how much consumption of sweet foods was influenced by emotions?
In a way, not really, because when I personally think of sweet foods, I think of happy thoughts. It's one of my I really like sweet tasting foods, and it reminds me of many happy memories as well. So one of the first questions that I actually ask participants, so how I start off the interviews and focus group, is to ask participants, what is your first thought when you hear the word sweet foods or desserts? And a lot of people will think, oh, happy or guilty pleasure or enjoyment, a treat, a reward. So all these things linked to them having, there's this sort of, I wouldn't call it psychological aspect maybe of consuming sugar that is perhaps often overlooked by maybe general health advice given, because people only focus on the health, which is correct. But when we talk about the recipients, how they receive the advice, they might think that, oh, this is unrealistic, or I can't do this, because it's not personalized to their perception or their way of living. And so I wasn't really surprised by how it was influenced by emotions. And I do think that it is something that we need to take into consideration, the value that all these foods can bring, not just emotions, but enjoyment and the worth of it.
So it's the physical health versus the mental health aspects of it, isn't it? Because did you find that a lot of people were saying it was a comfort food, that it tends to be that?
There were comments that sweet foods, so there are categorization of normal everyday sweet foods and also the special sweet foods.
Treats.
Or rewards.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? I'm frantically trying to see through the chat and see whether or not there's any hands.
I saw a question on whether participants were from the UK and what were their ethnicities. So yes, all participants were from the UK and their ethnicities. So there were majority British, white British, but there are also Asian British and also individuals who have lived in the UK for more than 5 years.
Are you asking those sorts of questions in the questionnaire as well to get a breakdown of populations that you're getting responses from?
Yeah.
So you'll get a much bigger picture of that rather than just the interviews. The questionnaire will give you a much bigger picture of that, won't it? Hopefully. Okay. Oh, here's a good one. What made you decide to focus on sweet foods rather than other tastes? And do you think the views would be as diverse for other tastes?
That's an interesting question. There are several reasons to focus on sweet tastes. So research previously has been done on salty taste, and researchers have found that if you change the exposure to salty foods, meaning that over an extended period of time, the diet has particularly low or particularly high salty foods, preferences for salty foods will change. However, recent review has shown that this has not been found for sweet tastes. And in fact, the different studies that have tried to find this have been showing weak correlations and maybe some contrasting studies. And so I feel like it will be of value to investigate sweet taste and whether it's modifiable, and if it is, how do people think about changing their sweetness in the diet? Can they really adapt to less sweet foods? Can they really adapt to not having any sweet taste in their diet? And so I think attitudes towards receiving maybe potential health advice will be important. And so I focus on sweet foods. And also because I have seen in other qualitative studies conducted in the US or in Europe that has shown very quite widely varying perceptions towards sugar and sweeteners. And so none of the studies have been done in the UK, and I would like to replicate it. And people tend to focus on sugar-sweetened beverages or certain sugar-sweetened confectionaries, but never really on sugars, sweeteners, and sweet-tasting foods, those bigger category.
And I think let's finish with this one from Gopal. Do you think people can live without sugar and salt intake in regular food? Again, you're not a nutritionist, so this is just your.
Personally, I think we do not have to add salt into the diet. It's because there are a lot of naturally occurring salts in ingredients. And with regards to sugar, it's also quite similar in terms of, for example, we can get natural sweetness from fruit. At the same time, I think that perhaps we could still enjoy food occasionally, and there are also some benefits to them, such as sugar and salt being natural preservatives. So when you pickle something or other preservatives.
No, that's fine. And I think we'll finish with Angela's comment is it would be very boring food.
Yeah.
I think that's an excellent place to stop for this evening. Thank you so much for a really interesting talk, Claudia. Can everybody just give Claudia a round of applause? And thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the evening, everyone, and I hope that we'll see you sometime soon. Thank you for taking part in Cafe Science Bournemouth. And to think where we were at the moment. Thank you very much for taking part, and thanks, Claudia.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.